Hello and welcome along to the Vine Christian Community Church podcast.
Oh,
Each week, we like to take a proper look back at the sermon from our most recent Sunday service, really digging down into the heart of what was shared. You could think of it as our weekly deep dive into the Word.
indeed. It's a great chance, isn't it, to revisit those key messages and perhaps explore them just a little bit more, maybe offer a slightly different angle or, a deeper understanding for everyone listening.
Absolutely. And today, we're going to be focusing on the sermon called From Chaos to Resurrection, The King Who Triumphs,
Right.
which looked at Daniel chapters 11 and 12 together.
Yeah, quite the packed chapters, those two.
They really are. And our aim, I suppose, in this deep dive is to see how these chapters almost give us a summary of the whole book of Daniel,
That's a good way to put it.
revealing God's work, often behind the scenes, within history, and all pointing towards that incredible hope of resurrection through Jesus Christ.
And what's really striking, I find, is how these ancient words, these prophecies, still feel so relevant today. Daniel's vision, it was given thousands of years ago, but it speaks into the kinds of anxieties, the uncertainties we might feel now.
Yeah.
When the world feels a bit chaotic, like you've sort of jumped into a story halfway through and you don't quite know where it's heading.
That's such a good analogy. Right then, let's get into it, shall we?
Let's do it.
We'll start with Daniel chapter 11,
Mhm.
maybe verses 2 through 4. That bit about God foretelling the rise and fall of kingdoms.
Okay. Yeah, so this prophecy, it actually starts back in chapter 10 when Daniel gets the vision.
Right.
But chapter 11 really lays out the detail. And it predicts some, major historical events impacting Judea, leading up towards the Roman Empire. And it even seems to hint at the end times.
Specifically in those first few verses, 2 to 4, it talks about Persian kings after Cyrus.
That's right. 3 more kings, it says. After Cyrus, he was around 536 BC. And then a 4th king is mentioned, one who'd be incredibly wealthy.
And we have a good idea who that was historically.
Yeah, historically, he's pretty widely identified as Xerxes.
Ah, Xerxes.
Exactly. And just like the prophecy says, he used his, enormous wealth to launch that massive attack on Greece in 480 DC. The detail is quite something.
It is rather striking, isn't it? When you see prophecy lining up with history like that, it makes you think about God's involvement in, everything.
It really does. It's not just God reacting, is it? It suggests he knows the future. He's working his purposes out.
What does that tell us, do you think, about how God operates? Because sometimes we maybe look for the big, flashy miracles.
Yeah, and we might miss this. It challenges that idea that God only steps in during obvious supernatural moments. These verses suggest God is constantly at work, weaving through history, even through, human decisions and political shifts, things we might see as just normal history.
It makes you think about his patience, his long game, doesn't it?
It certainly does. God's perspective is so much bigger than ours. We see the chaos. He sees the plan unfolding.
It reminds me of that verse in Isaiah 46.10.
Ah, yes. I make known the end from the beginning.
From ancient times, what is still to come.
I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please.
Yeah, that nails it, doesn't it? It underscores this absolute sovereignty, this plan working out through time.
Okay, so moving on a bit in the chapter, verses 5 through 20 of Daniel 11, they shift focus, don't they, to this big power struggle.
Yeah, the famous king of the south versus the king of the north.
Right, the Ptolemies in Egypt versus the Seleucids in Syria after Alexander the Great's empire broke up.
Exactly. And again, the detail is just remarkable. It's like a blow-by-blow account written centuries before it happened.
It describes conflicts, alliances. There's even a marriage alliance mentioned that goes wrong, isn't there?
Yes, that's in there. Betrayals, shifts in power. It really paints a picture of just how turbulent that period was in the Near East. Constant jostling for dominance. It really does show how, fragile earthly power is. Kingdoms rise, they fall, treaties are made, treaties are broken. But what's the deeper message for us in all that historical detail?
Well, I think the key thing is that even in the middle of all that human squabbling and instability, God's overall control, his sovereignty, is never really in doubt.
Right.
It makes me think of Psalm 2, where it talks about the nations conspiring and the rulers plotting.
And God laughs.
Yes. Verses 1 to 4, God is pictured almost looking down from heaven, not panicked, but almost, laughing at their futile attempts to challenge him and his anointed. It's a powerful image of his ultimate authority.
That's a really helpful connection. It makes you think differently about events that seem like total disasters at the time.
Like the crucifixion.
Exactly.
Right.
For those watching Jesus die, it must have seemed like the absolute end, utter defeat.
Unimaginable despair for his followers, surely. It looked like evil had won, but actually,
Behind the scenes,
behind the scenes, God was doing his most incredible work. He was enacting his plan for rescuing humanity. Jesus wasn't being defeated. He was conquering sin and death precisely through that apparent defeat.
so even the worst that humans can do, even rebellion against God himself, can't actually stop his ultimate plan.
That's such a vital point. God knew it all, he foresaw it, and he used even that horrific act, the ultimate injustice, to bring about the ultimate act of love and redemption. It's mind-blowing, really.
It really is. Okay, then we get to Daniel 11, verses 21 through 35. And here the focus narrows onto one particular figure, doesn't it? This contemptible person.
Yes, a really nasty character, generally understood to be Antiochus V Epiphanes, one of those Seleucid kings, the king of the north.
And the prophecy details his deceitful rise to power and his terrible persecution of the Jewish people. What stands out here?
Again, it's the specifics. It mentions him desecrating the temple, stopping the daily sacrifices.
The abomination that causes desolation.
That exact phrase, yes, which was just horrific for the Jewish people, a direct assault on their faith, on God's dwelling place, a truly dark time.
But even then, the prophecy doesn't just talk about the persecution. It also
Well,
mentions
division. Some would be corrupted, swayed by flattery, but others, a faithful remnant, would resist.
even though they faced awful things, sword, fire, captivity, plunder, as it says.
Yes, it paints this powerful picture of faithful endurance against overwhelming odds. It really highlights that theme running through the Bible. Even in the darkest times, God preserves a faithful people.
And they're refined through it all.
Exactly, refined, tested, and think about the history that followed the resistance sparked by Mattathias, this one priest's act of defiance.
Leading to the Maccabean revolt.
Precisely, which is what Hanukkah commemorates. It shows how seemingly small acts of faithfulness, of courage, can ignite something huge. God can use ordinary people standing firm.
It's a great reminder, isn't it, that following God often means going against the flow, being countercultural.
Absolutely. What looks like weakness or failure to the world.
Can be part of God's strategy.
Yes, it can be the seed of unexpected victory. It ties into wisdom, doesn't it? Like Proverbs 1.7 says.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge.
But fools despise wisdom and instruction. True wisdom is sticking with God, even when it seems foolish or costly in the moment.
Right. Now, the next section, verses 36 to 45 of Daniel 11, seems to shift again slightly. It talks about another king, one who's incredibly arrogant, self-exalting.
Yeah, this one disregards all gods, even the God of his fathers, apparently, and speaks blasphemous things against the God of gods. He has a period of success, military victories.
Who is this figure meant to be? Is it still Antiochus or someone else?
Well, that's where there's a bit more debate among scholars, isn't there?
Oh, okay.
Some see it as describing the later, maybe even more extreme phase of Antiochus V's reign. Others think the focus shifts here, perhaps pointing forward to a future end times figure.
Like the Antichrist.
That's a very common interpretation, yeah. The description does seem to go beyond Antiochus in some ways. But whether it's primarily Antiochus or a future figure, the prophecy describes his military campaigns, his invasion of the beautiful land that's Israel, and crucially, his eventual downfall. No matter how powerful he seems, his reign has limits. God's judgment is certain.
And doesn't the New Testament pick up on this language?
It certainly seems to. Jesus himself, in Matthew 24, warns about a future abomination of desolation standing in the holy place.
Right, echoing Daniel.
And Paul, in 2 Thessalonians 2, describes the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist, in terms very similar to Daniel 11.36, exalting himself over everything.
So there's a recurring pattern of this kind of ultimate arrogance and rebellion against God.
It seems so. But the crucial point, even if this refers to a future Antichrist, is that even his actions, however terrible, are within God's sovereign knowledge and plan. His time is limited.
That's both sobering and, in a strange way, comforting.
It is. It offers hope because it tells us God is still in control. No earthly or even demonic power can ultimately win against him. His purposes will be accomplished.
Which brings us finally to Daniel chapter 12. After all the conflict and darkness of chapter 11, this feels like a real shift towards hope, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Tribulation, yes, but also deliverance and, resurrection.
Absolutely. Chapter 12 is the climax, the hopeful conclusion to Daniel's visions. It speaks directly about the end times, a time of unprecedented distress, worse than anything before it.
But there's deliverance promised.
Yes, deliverance for God's people, specifically everyone whose name is found written in the book.
The book of life.
Exactly. And then it speaks explicitly about resurrection, something only hinted at earlier in the Old Testament. Multitudes who sleep in the dust of the earth will awake, some to everlasting life, others to shame and everlasting contempt.
Wow. That's incredibly clear about final judgment and eternal destinies.
It really is. And it adds that the wise, those who understand God's ways, and those who lead others to righteousness, will shine like the brightness of the heavens, like stars forever. There's a sense of final justice, reward, vindication.
How does this connect back to the big theme of the sermon, Chaos to Resurrection?
Well, Daniel himself is told to seal up the words until the end time when knowledge will increase. It implies we'll understand more as history unfolds. But it keeps that tension wickedness continues, yet God's ultimate triumph is assured.
And Daniel's own longing for this future hope.
Yes, that longing finds its ultimate answer, its fulfillment, not just in a future event, but in a person, Jesus Christ and his resurrection.
Ah, so Jesus' resurrection is the guarantee, the first fruits of what Daniel 12 promises.
Precisely. What was prophesied, hoped for, becomes historical reality in Jesus. The God who worked subtly behind the scenes in chapter 11 steps fully into view in the resurrection. It's the ultimate victory over chaos, suffering, betrayal, death itself. It anchors our hope not just in a future promise, but in a past event with future implications for all who trust him.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so thinking about all this, the sweep of history, the faithful remnant, the arrogant kings, the final hope and resurrection, how should this shape how we actually live day to day? What are the main takeaways?
That's always the bottom line, isn't it? How does this change us now? I think there are perhaps three really key things to hold on to.
Sorry.
Firstly, we need to trust God in the chaos. Like Daniel, like that faithful remnant. We won't always understand why things are happening. The world can seem confusing, even frightening.
Yeah.
But we trust the one who does see the whole picture, the one orchestrating history towards his good end. Trust his character, even when you can't trace his hand.
Trust God in the chaos. Got it. What's second?
Remain faithful. Don't compromise what lasts forever for what feels good or easy right now.
Don't trade eternal glory for temporary comfort.
Exactly. These prophecies show that faith involves testing, refinement. It's not always easy, but it's worth it. We're being shaped for eternity.
Okay, trust God. Remain faithful.
Yeah.
And the third?
Live with resurrection hope. Actively. Daily. Remember, this life isn't the end of the story.
It's not the final chapter.
Not at all. A greater king, King Jesus, has already won the decisive victory, and he is coming back to make everything right. Our ultimate hope isn't in fixing this world perfectly now, but in the new creation he will bring.
Yeah, that really shifts your perspective, doesn't it?
It should. It reminds me of 1 Peter chapter 1, verses 3-5. It says, God has given us a new birth into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead.
And into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade.
Kept in heaven for you. That's the reality we live in because of the resurrection. That hope changes everything.
Trust God in the chaos, remain faithful, and live with resurrection hope. That's powerful stuff.
It really is. Daniel gives us such a vital long-term perspective.
Well, thank you so much for joining us for this week's deep dive into the sermon from the Vine Christian Community Church.
It's been great to chat through it.
We really hope this exploration of Daniel's incredible prophecies and seeing how they point ultimately to Jesus Christ and his resurrection has been, well, insightful and genuinely encouraging for you today.
We hope so too.
Please do join us again next time as we delve into another message and continue to unpack the amazing truths of Scripture together.
Look forward to it.
And just a reminder, for more information about the Vine Christian Community Church, you can always visit our website. That's www.vinechurch.uk. Thanks so much for listening.